Welcome back. So, starting the 1st of April, Delhi is all set to ban old and new compliant vehicles from the roads. But that's not all. Fuel stations across the capital are also rolling out new high-tech systems to enforce this rule. So, if a vehicle is without a valid PUC and pulls up, a smart system that is linked to a central database will instantly flag it and cut off fuel supply. 500 such fuel stations in Delhi have already been installed. But that is just part of the entire plan. This is from the 1st of April. They will also ensure that no vehicle which is more than 15 years old if it's a petrol vehicle and no vehicle which is more than 10 years old if it's a diesel vehicle will be allowed to ply or get petrol or fuel in the roads of Delhi. And that is the big story. If it's an old car, does it naturally become bekar? That's the big question we will be asking here. I'm being joined by Vimlendu Jha, who's a noted environmentalist. I'm being joined by Kushan Mitra, who is a top automotive journalist, and I'm also being joined by Amit Bhatt, who is the MD of ICCT India, which is, of course, the International Council on Clean Transportation. Thank you all for joining me. Let me begin with you, Kushan Mitra. The first question that comes to my mind when we look at the crackdown on vehicles more than 15 years old for petrol vehicles and more than 10 years old when it comes to diesel vehicles is that does a vehicle automatically start becoming a pollutant when it crosses a certain age limit in its, as a vehicle? Or is it because if it's not maintained or if it's not been serviced properly? Is there a fundamental problem in a policy here?
Honestly speaking, if a vehicle is well maintained, it complies with pollution norms at the time. 10 years ago, we were running BS3 diesels, and BS3 diesels have a certain amount of pollution that they're allowed to give out, certain amount of emissions they're about to give out. Now, a BS3 diesel or a BS3 petrol car is not as clean as a current BS6 petrol or diesel car because of the emission norms that they follow. But it is also correct that maintenance carries a lot of weight. If a vehicle is poorly maintained, if it doesn't adhere to pollution norms under a PUC, it will pollute more than a well-maintained old vehicle. So there is that. So I think this has to be it has to also consider maintenance of a vehicle is also a major factor in this. So I think that has to be considered by the government. The problem with this policy that the government has announced is quite simply, in my opinion, is that people will find workarounds around it, whether it is, getting fake PUC certificates or buying diesel or petrol on the sly. Will it create a black market for petrol or diesel? So that's my major concern over here. But yes, if a vehicle doesn't have a PUC and you can automate the process, it'll be quite good. In Delhi, as it is, the rule is you cannot run a petrol vehicle over 15 years old or a diesel vehicle over 10 years old. That's been the rule for a while. I have some certain major issues with that, which have to do with, if a person uses a vehicle for not that much time, if you're a retired person, is it fair to force you to buy a vehicle because, it's old, but it's well maintained? So, but yes, at a level, what the government is doing will ensure a level of compliance with regards to emissions.
So you're saying that this is a step which is in the right direction when it comes to the motive of phasing out old vehicles, but the criteria for deciding whether a vehicle is old or not needs to be a bit more scientific than just looking at age. I will come to that. I'll come to you for a follow-up question on that, Kushan Mitra. I also want to go across to Vimlendu. Vimlendu, we know that vehicular pollution is one of the biggest causes of pollution in the national capital, and we realize it during the smog months when the atmospheric conditions are in such a position that it accentuates a problem. But the number one steady cause of pollution in the national capital has always been vehicular pollution. But is this then the right or the most scientific approach to go ahead and phasing out vehicles on the basis of age? Or should the step which has now come out in terms of going on making POC certificate the number one criteria to judge a vehicle's roadworthiness, should that not be the more defining criteria at this moment?
See, I think we need to do many things to really, address the crisis of air pollution that Delhi has. And rightly so, 50% of pollution, the air pollution load that we're talking about is because of vehicles. But the solution to that is not necessarily only hitting on private vehicles. In the sense, of course, this 50% pollution that we're talking about is mostly through private vehicles because there's lack of public transport. When we're looking at government as a policy, the onus of pollution, once again, has been put on private citizens rather than actually looking at expediting the process of both in terms of affordability, access, safety, security of public transport and availability of public transport. So I think the first solution, ideally, if air pollution is what we need to address, is to look at how do we make public transport the cultural, ecological, economic norm of Delhi, rather than just going after the private vehicles. Indeed, yes. Do we need to really shut down the polluting vehicles? Are old vehicles more polluting than the new vehicles? Indeed, they are. And therefore, I think also need to understand that somewhere we'll have to draw the line and put a category where for a 10-year-old or a diesel vehicle or a 15-year-old petrol vehicle, they are perhaps in theory, because at the end of the day, we cannot just be looking at individually checking and do a fitment test, as we know the regime, like everyone could perhaps pay 500 rupees more and get a PUC certificate. We know how that PUC regime works. So somewhere I think it's a welcome step, but we will also, as in that cannot just be the only thing that the government should be doing, because air pollution is largely because of many other issues and not just private vehicles. It's the lack of public transport and public transport infrastructure, affordability, availability, and security that needs to be addressed first.
Okay, but of course, the lack of public transport is a huge problem by itself, and that, I mean, solving that creates a solution to a lot of other problems as well. But Amit Bhatt, of course, you represent someone who's on a body which talks about the need for clean transportation, and the need for sustainable clean fuels is seen as something which is inevitable in order to try and clean up our environment, especially clean up the air around us. But many people believe that this ban on vehicles more than 15 years old for petrol or more than 10 years old for diesel is purely to ensure that people give in to the car lobby, sell their vehicles even when they're roadworthy, and perhaps be forced into buying perhaps hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles in an effort to make them switch to cleaner options. Do you feel it's a fair accusation being levied?
So one definitely is the point that transport is very important for cleaning Delhi's air. That's one. But PUC is not giving us the right data. So I'll tell you why. Because A, it's a stationary test. It does not capture vehicle movement. Second, two important criteria pollutants that we talk about, particulate matter or NOx emission, are not even captured in PUC certification. So it's really not capturing the right data. So we did a study last year where we captured about 110,000 vehicles in Delhi using a remote sensing technique of what is coming out from tailpipe of these vehicles. And that's finding were really shocking for us. One, we found that BS6 vehicles are the cleanest, and that technology has really reduced emissions. So and we have data to back this claim now. Second, we found that the real world emission of motor vehicles is much higher than lab limits, even in PUC limit. And in some cases, we found that this real world is as high as 25 times the prescribed limit. It was a massive difference. Third, we found that Delhi is you just take the cars. On an average, last 3-4 years, you'll see Delhi has the car registration gone up by almost 12%. So if you reduce emission by bringing new technologies, maybe 10-15%, the absolute increase in number kind of outweighs that emission. So we have to actually look at how does Delhi move towards zero emission vehicle. That is the long-term solution to the problem. These steps are important as an interim measures, but long-term transition to zero emission vehicle is the only solution to address emission from transport in Delhi.
But then when you mention, Mr. Amit Bhatt, as to how the system, even when it comes to pollution control, can be gamified, Kushan was also saying even the rule around 15-year-old vehicles or 10-year-old vehicles can easily be circumvented through the satellite towns in the NCR region. Is that not a problem? Because the basic culture of India is to do jugaad. And if you come up with a rule, especially which is about pollution or roadworthiness of vehicle, people will find ways to circumvent that. So the fight to cleaner air cannot be relied entirely on the basis of just putting all the onus on private vehicle owners, because they will find ways to beat the system.
No, it's important, but we also have to understand, and if you look at the data, what within the transport sector, what pollutes most in Delhi? So one definitely is commercial vehicle, like trucks. And then you have two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and cars. But if you just look at the sheer number of two-wheelers and private vehicles that we have, it's a humongous amount of vehicles that we have. So while Delhi did experiment with CNG, commercial buses and taxis, but it was an important step, but we have not addressed the emission from private vehicle, and that number is growing. So cars are increasing every year by 12%. Now, what do we do? And if these numbers are going to increase, we have to shift to zero emission vehicle, because what you have to understand that the fight against pollution in cities is how do you reduce combustion? And whether it is mobile combustion like motor vehicles or even stationary combustion like solid waste, garbage burning, so on and so forth. So we have to reduce combustion in our cities, and that's a larger framing of the solution.
So Amit, you're saying that it's also, while, as Vimalendra pointed out, private vehicle emission is not the most and the only pressing source of pollution from vehicle emissions. It's still a significant one. Vimalendra, in that case, what is the solution going forward in terms of feasibility? Now, obviously, building public transport, better public transport, is a Hail Mary solution, but it takes a lot of time. It takes years of sustained cooperation from all governmental agencies involved, and that is honestly unfeasible, because we stay in a country also where having your own private vehicle is a status symbol. For women, it is also seen as a sign of safety as well. So there will be several reasons why people will always prefer having their own vehicles, even if a public transport system is available. Then how do we make private transport a bit more economical, or at least better off for the environment here? Do we continue to look at solutions such as carpooling or even some experiments which the Delhi government under the Aam Aadmi Party had flirted with in the past but has never sincerely followed up on it?
Yeah, I don't think odd even and such, these are band-aid solutions when we're looking at the kind of issue that we have at hand. When entire city is in ICU, you can't be, administering paracetamol, and that's what
Or
it is.
maybe a low emission zone like what we have seen in, say, London and other cities.
Absolutely. So we will have to do that, because we need to understand that, when your AQI is almost 900 and crossing 1,000 at least, 10 to 15 days a year, and almost on average remains at 300, 350, hazardous and severe and much more. We'll have to look at many things. But at the same time, Ritangshu, we need to understand that what is happening to these old vehicles. Because if these vehicles are actually going only 15 kilometers away to Rohtak and to Bagpat and to Sonipat and flying, and if we all have the same airshed, at the end of the day, we keep complaining, and stupidly so, that the farmers, pollute of Punjab have been polluting our air. And here we're actually sending most of the vehicles, and Kushan will tell you that what are these fancy vehicles, these so-called fit vehicles which are 10-year-old, where are they going? They're actually going to far south in Kerala, and they're actually going up north, and fancy BMWs and Audis are actually going to Punjab in that sense. So temporarily, you might pretend or feel good that you don't have a polluting vehicle in your immediate vicinity, but in your airshed, you still have the same thing. So they need to really find out a regime that looks at pollution through emission rather than pollution through age. And that perhaps would be more scientific way to look at it. But when you're looking at crores and crores of vehicles, we will have to really have some broad stroke policy making, and that's where perhaps the government is hitting at this. But we will have to have a comprehensive plan. We'll have to look at where is our pollution control board. As you won't believe that the PUC regime is the most polluting regime or the most corrupt regime that we actually have in the name of pollution control, which just doesn't serve the purpose. So we'll comprehensively, long-term, and a regional airshed plan is what is actually needed.
I mean, I don't even think whether vehicles need to go so far to Kerala or to go to the north here. I mean, it's the simplest solution most Delhiwalas have in terms of getting rid of a vehicle which is perhaps going to be phased out is to sell it in Noida or Ghaziabad. And again, we are all in the same NCR region, so I don't know how these vehicles still continue to ply 15, 20 kilometers away. Kushan, I mean, Vimlendu did indicate that you had more to add to it, but yes, I'll come to you for the final word. I think the solution to begin with, the first step has to be to come up with the most scientific criterion to decide whether a vehicle is worthy of plying or not. And as we have discussed, age is perhaps not the only meter. To begin with, mileage or the condition of the overall vehicle has to be seen as a more core criteria to decide the roadworthiness of a vehicle.
No, absolutely agree with everybody over here, both Amit and Viplendu. First and foremost, you have to come up with better solutions. Carbon emissions, if you just look at pure CO2, a diesel engine has less CO2 than, say, a new engine from, then NOx or particulate matter. So those are factors over here. The PUC regime is not perfect. You also genuinely have to improve public transport. I know the Delhi government, both in the past and now, are working to improve the bus system. I've argued in the past that we need more buses over here. The metro can only do so much. We need more electric buses because buses, I've said you can't have free buses. In fact, you rather have more reliable buses that come every 5 to 10 minutes and have a free bus that comes every 10 minutes, every 1 hour, sorry. So we need to do more on public transport in large cities like New York, London, Shanghai, Beijing. You have much more reliable public transport. You have to have park and ride systems. It's all there. It's genuinely inefficient for me. You can call me a car guy, but it is inefficient for me to drive down to central Delhi from where I live. I'd rather take public transport. I use the metro all the time.
Yeah.
So that is there. You also have to look at a much more comprehensive PUC system. And yes, there is airshed. Okay, you can say the rules apply to the NCR, but it is true that 10-year-old diesel cars are being sold from Delhi to Punjab or to South India. If you actually go down to Chennai, you'll see a lot of HR26, that is Gurugram registration cars in Chennai. And it seems a bit odd, but it's because these older diesel cars are being sold there. But you also have to understand, it has to be much more comprehensive. You have to look at the fairness, right? You force somebody to buy a new car just because their car is old, even if they only use it for a short distance. That has to be factored in. Personally, I'm all for electric cars in the city, but you have to solve for congestion. Roads and congestion are not, you can't keep on building new roads. So it has to be much more comprehensively looked at by both city governments as well as the central government to find solutions over here. It's very easy to make a diktat that we will not give petrol or diesel to these cars.
I think the one clear takeaway at this point is that there's no one single solution that comes in. It has to be a more thought of and a series of solutions which have to be made in such a way that they complement each other, whether it be boosting public transport, whether it be coming up with a more efficient means of deciding whether to phase out vehicles. And if vehicles are polluting in Delhi, they can't be seen as not polluting in Haryana or in Kerala or in the rest of the country. And if a vehicle is unfit to ply, it should not be fit to ply anywhere in the country. I think that should be a key starting point. But thank you so much for joining me on this very short but very meaningful debate, something which impacts residents not just in NCR but gradually in every urban city of the country. Thank you so much, Vimlendu Jha, Kushan Mitra, and also Amit for joining us with your details, with your perspectives. And it's time for a short break. More news and updates continue on the other side. Stay tuned.